Hello, hello, and welcome back to Journey of a Fearless Female. I'm your host, Paola Rosser, and this week my guest is Jesica Buchanan, and she is going to tell you all about her journey as a fearless female. So introduce yourself, Jessica.
Thank you so much. I love being categorized as a fearless female. So thank you so much for having me on. My name is Jessica Buchanan, and I am a New York Times bestselling author. I am a teacher by profession, a coach, and I think most notably, I'm a kidnapping survivor. In
Wow.
2011, I was on a routine field mission in Somalia working for a non-governmental organization, the Danish Demining Group. And I was on just like a workshop with my colleague, and we were apprehended, taken at gunpoint, held hostage, driven out into the desert, and forced to basically walk like a mock execution, and subsequently were held for 93 days in the desert until
93 days.
yeah, and I mean, I can elaborate, of course, but
Oh, yes.
yeah.
There's a lot to go. So you were kidnapped in Somalia. It's crazy because I
hmm
just watched a movie about it's called The Plane, and they crash in this like remote island.
mm.
Um and they were like kidnapped, but how old were you when this happened?
So I just came up on my 11-year rescue anniversary. So I was 31. So not
Okay.
young, not old. Had just gotten married, didn't have any kids yet. But that was one of the things that kept going through my head was, oh my goodness, like I'm only 31 years old. Like I'm at the very beginning of my career. I haven't even had kids yet because I've been putting it off for work. And
Yeah.
now my life is like most likely over.
Before
So
you went on this trip, did you have any fear? Like, were you just like, no, this is never going to happen? It's just like once it, were they even warning you like this could possibly
mm.
happen?
So, I mean, I was working for an organization, which I feel like is always important for me to make like very clear. I think a lot of times people think that this happens to individuals who just like are like going into countries like Afghanistan and Somalia, to like sightsee or self-proclaimed journalist or something. And that's not what I was. I was placed there by my organization and followed all of the necessary security protocols. Um, and they, had followed like the UN standards for security. It was level 3, which meant it's not like the safest part of the world to be in, but also meant that they were supposed to be adhering to any kind of warnings. And so what I didn't know, what no one told me, my colleague or nor the security advisor, was that there was actually a direct kidnapping threat for the organization. But no one
Oh,
told me because they didn't want me to cancel my training and they didn't consider it a viable threat. So
wow.
that was very disconcerting to learn like 27 days into the kidnapping because, what are you supposed to do with that? Especially when the person you're being held with is essentially responsible for withholding that information with you from you, and then that might be the last person you see in your lifetime, right?
Yeah.
I did have like this inner knowing. I knew something was awry, something was amiss. I
I was just
called,
about to ask you that. So,
yeah.
what were you doing? Like, take us through that day. Like, what were you doing and what were you feeling?
Well, a couple of days before so I was based up in northern Somalia. Like Somalia is shaped like a seven. So I was at the top of the seven with my husband, who was working for a different organization. And that area is pretty safe, pretty calm. And I traveled all over East Africa. So this training was in the southern part of Somalia, which is closer to like places like Mogadishu, which you might have heard of in the news or something. Um, and not so safe, not as calm. And I called my colleague up and I said, hey, I don't feel good about this. I don't want to go on this trip. Why don't we bring your staff up? Blah blah blah. And he was like, well, we have to be in solidarity with our teams. And you said you were going to come down here and do this training, and you've already canceled twice before. So if you don't get down here, I'm going to report you to the supervisor, and
Mm,
you're not doing your job, which was true on one hand. But on the other hand, it's like, well, where is that line between like personal safety, right?
yeah.
And so I thought, I'm a school teacher from Ohio. Like, what's the worst that can happen, right? So I got on a UN plane, go down there. 2 days, it was a 3-day training. The first 2 days were in the staff office where I was staying in the northern part of the city, which was fine. But we had to cross over across town on the third day, which is what I was worried about because if like something significant is going to happen, it's usually going to happen when you're in transit, right? That's when you're most vulnerable. And so I was particularly worried, and I remember having nightmares all night long the night before we were
Oh,
going to head to the south. Like, it, interestingly enough, my nightmares were very clear. They were very vivid, and they were about pirates scaling the walls of the compound and trying to kidnap us from like our house that we were staying in. And I
wow.
like hardly slept all night. And I woke up the next morning and I remember going into the bathroom, looking at myself in the mirror and just being like, Jess, do you want to do this? Like, is this something that you want to do?
Yeah. Is
And
it worth the paycheck, really?
right, 100%, right? Like, and I mean, I think a lot of this is a very universal problem for women in what many different capacities, but especially in the professional capacity, right? Like you're feeling pressured, you don't want to do something, you don't want to go someplace, you don't want to work with someone because your intuition is like you're not safe, and then we
Mm-hmm.
like logic our way out of it, or we rationalize our way out of it. And I was standing there like, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to go down there and be like, so I'm not going to go to the staff office this morning because I had these nightmares all night long about getting kidnapped by pirates. I'm going to sound
Yeah.
like a crazy person, right? But then 6 hours later, as I get into a convoy of vehicles to cross town to go back to the north side of the office, what happens? My car is overtaken at gunpoint and I am kidnapped by pirates.
Oh, how many people were in the car?
And me, and then my colleague,
So,
Paul, and then the security advisor, who is a Somali guy, and then the driver. So they pulled him out. So it ended up just being me and Paul that were taken. We were the only expats on that
oh,
field mission. So I think ultimately Paul was the target, and I just happened to be there at the wrong time.
oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So you were held for 93 days. I mean,
Yeah.
how many times did you think like I'm never going to get rescued? Like I'm going to be here for the rest of my life or they're going to kill me? Like how did
Uh,
they treat you?
I mean, I never thought I was going to be rescued. I had no idea that that was even like a thing. I thought for sure the only way we were going to get out of there was if a ransom was paid. And
Mhm.
so I knew that our organization had kidnapping and ransom insurance, but I mean, they started their ransom demand at $45 million. And what I
What?
heard, yeah, because at this time, like, it's hard to explain. Like if anybody in your audience is really interested, they could watch that movie, the Mars Captain Phillips,
Oh
about
yeah,
the
yeah,
Maersk,
yeah.
Alabama. Yeah, I haven't seen it for obvious reasons, but it's the same kind of deal. At this time, pirates were like rampant on the water, and they were overtaking ships, these big, huge cargo ships, and they would get big ransoms, like in the millions of dollars, because these ships had cargo on them.
Wow.
And they didn't. I think after the Captain Phillips ordeal, they started moving on to land
Mm,
because the water wasn't safe to kidnap on, and so they were taking expats and tourists and NGO workers. But they were still like asking for these crazy high cargo ship amounts, right?
yeah. How
So
is the media not covering this? Like,
So
you
they
know,
don't, on request of the family and the organization and the FBI, because the more media coverage there is, then the higher the stakes are in terms of like a ransom demand. And it's for the victims, the hostages' safety, that it's not being covered in the media.
so during that time that you were out there for 93 days, like, how did you not just give up hope? I mean, how did you spend your days trying to stay alive? Like, what was your mindset during those days?
I mean, I think high highs and low lows, more low lows than highs. I had nothing to do. Like we lived outside. So I sat under a tree or laid under a bush all day, and then I would lay out in the open at night. We weren't ever taken to a building or a tent or given any kind of shelter. So I was exposed to the elements. So the desert is really hot during the day and really cold at night. And there's no, it rains like, you're sitting
Yeah.
there like it just drenched. And first thing in the morning, it was awful. And I mean, I'm an outdoorsy girl, but I mean, this stretched me to my limits. Um,
Yes.
I I'm a person of faith, and so my spirituality is really important to me. It was then and it is now. So I spent a lot of time trying to meditate, trying to pray. I did this, I spent like, I think it was like day 40 or something, somewhere in there. Uh, I decided that, I needed to stay sane and stay alive and survive this thing and get back to my husband and get back to my family. I felt like I had a duty and a responsibility to survive. And so
Mm-hmm.
I made that my job, like,
Yeah.
okay, I don't know, like, I'm a hard worker. I know how to work.
Yeah.
So I can do this. I can survive. And I would take it in increments, like sometimes I felt strong enough to look at the next 30 days. Other times I felt only strong enough to look at the next 5 minutes.
Mm.
But through it all, I didn't have any doubt. I don't think I really doubted that I wasn't going to make it out. I didn't know how long it was going to take, and I didn't know
Yeah.
what kind of shape I was going to be in, but I just believed that, and I would visualize myself walking out of there and reuniting with my husband, and I would visualize myself like with becoming a mother, and I would just visualize what I wanted my life to look like when I got out. I visualize not putting off like not doing work that I didn't want to do. Like it's one of those, it's like a near death experience, right? Like,
Yeah.
only mine just took so long. But I can imagine that you could equate it to somebody with a chronic disease who, so,
Yeah.
goes into remission or something, you get a second lease on life. And so I just kept visualizing that for myself until 93 days later, it happened, not in the way I had ever expected or even knew was possible,
Yeah.
but it came.
I mean, for somebody who is visualizing this, I'm thinking about like, well, how did you go to the bathroom? Like when you got your
Hmm.
period, did they give you stuff for your period? Did they feed you? Did they give you, sunscreen or chapstick or toilet
Hmm.
paper or like how did they treat you like just an animal? And were you next to Paul? Like did you have Paul to at least have some comfort and someone to
Hmm.
talk to?
So, like the creature comforts, no, I was not given like toilet paper. Sometimes we got some tissues, and that ended up being really problematic because I got a urinary tract infection, which
Mm.
would then actually turn out to be a gift because that was what got the wheels, turning for my rescue. But I had one period while I was out there, like right after, like a week after. I thought I was pregnant actually when
No.
so I don't know what was happening. I don't there. I'll just say it was like a murder scene, and I didn't know what was happening to my body, and I couldn't get any medical care. And that was it. I didn't have any kind of menstruation after that. So
Uh,
something was happening to my body. I think it was obviously the stress and the nutritional deficiencies. I was given like, I mean, it was irregular. Like, I think I probably had something to eat every day, but it was small. It was like maybe a little mini size can of tuna fish.
oh,
Or I like ended up eating that with like a tampon applicator because I couldn't figure out how to eat tuna with my fingers. Um, and I
oh,
was just gross and dirty all the time too. I had a tampon applicator. They let me keep like a little purse that had stuff in it, and I had a tampon in it.
oh my
Um,
gosh.
so you get very, I felt like MacGyver, right? Like you
Yeah,
get very,
resourceful.
very resourceful very quickly.
Yeah.
And you kind of learn to laugh about it too, because you're like, this is just the most bizarre thing, right? Like this
Yeah.
is so,
Only
so
happens in
different.
movies.
It only,
Like
I mean,
it
it
only
is.
happens in movies. Like when I watch movies like that, I think to myself, like, how would I be? Who would I be? I know personally, like I'm so domesticated with all the elements of like, your comforts of home that I know that like when you describe being out in the sun, like to not have sunscreen or chapstick or
Hmm.
water or to be able, like, your fingers are dirty and dry because you haven't had water and you're dehydrated, and,
Hmm.
or having to go to the bathroom and like there's no bathroom,
Yeah.
or how are you going to clean yourself? How are you going to
Hmm.
take care of yourself? Like, you did that for 93 days. That's incredible and truly fearless, because I think I probably would have given up right away and been like, just take me. Were you allowed to have conversations with Paul, or were you guys supposed to stay silent?
So all of it. Sometimes we were allowed to be together and we were allowed to have conversations. Usually, if negotiations weren't moving in the right direction, is what they would say. Then we were not allowed to talk, or they would like take one of us to another camp and fire off a bunch of gunshots and come back and say, well, we killed him or we
Oh
killed her,
gosh.
like all this mind the games trying to, torture us with that. Or they would say, they would take one of us and drive us off and say, oh, we're going to go sell them to Al-Shabaab, which is an Islamic terrorist extremist group that would, kill us.
Yeah.
Um, so, there was a lot of that, and you don't have any reason not to believe them,
Right. Yeah.
like, so every time something like that happened, then you don't know, maybe this is it. Maybe they aren't bluffing. Um, you know, Even though I was mad at Paul,
Yeah.
um, he was all I had. And so there were moments where, it was really nice to have somebody else there. Um, and then there were moments of just extreme long loneliness, like the longness of it all, um, that felt like I might just come out of my skin because it was
Yeah.
so empty and so long.
Were there anybody that you connected with on their side in any way, shape, or form? Like, were there women, were there children, or were they just all men?
All men. One child, and like a 9, 10 year old, Abdullahi. He was actually, and I thought, oh, okay, well, this is great because I'm a teacher, right? Like, I've never met
Yeah.
a kid I can't like connect with, but man, gosh, he was so traumatized.
Oh.
He'd already killed 3 people. I mean, he was just two black holes for eyes, and he just tormented me. He would follow me around. He would order me. He would put knives to my throat. He would point guns at my head. And I mean, he was a little kid, so who was like traumatized, so didn't understand, like, hey, if I shoot her, then, we're going to be in trouble because we don't have anything to negotiate with.
Yeah.
So he disappeared on New Year's Day. I remember it was our last altercation, and he put a knife to my throat because I wouldn't move. Like, he wanted me to move like 6 inches over or something, and
Yeah.
I was like, I'd had enough of it. I was like, I'm done with all of this. I'd have those moments where I would just be like, I'm gonna lose it on you guys.
Yeah.
And that was one of those mornings, because it's New Year's Day and you're like, are you kidding me? Like,
Yeah.
I woke up in hell one more time, and I'm starting out 2012 in this godforsaken place, and I have no idea how much longer I'm going to be here. So, yeah, it was like I started learning how to cook, like, over the campfire,
Yeah.
because I felt like that gave me something to do, and it gave me something to do with my time. But I also, I think, started accepting that I was going to be there for a really long time, and I just needed to learn how to do something,
Yeah.
because this thing was going to take a while. Um, and so that was depressing and also kind of empowering at the same time, because it gave me some autonomy over like cleanliness. I didn't
Yeah.
have like everybody's hands in my food and stuff, but it was still um pretty bleak.
Yeah. Were there other people other than you and Paul in that camp?
Just the kidnappers, just the pirates, no other hostages that we saw, just
So
us.
tell us about the day that you were rescued. Take us back to that day.
Yeah, so that would have been January 24th, 2012. And like I said, I had gotten a urinary tract infection. It was turning into a kidney infection.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew this because I'd had one before, and I'd been hospitalized in Kenya for like a week. So I knew I needed like an IV, I needed a doctor. I needed drugs, or
Mm-hmm.
else I was going to probably get sepsis and die. Um, and so about 10 days before we had what would become our last proof of life call, with our family like liaison person, and that would be like when they would drive us out into the desert, put us on the phone and make us talk to someone and answer a series of security questions to make sure that we were still alive so that negotiations could keep moving forward.
Yeah.
And I told her, things aren't good. Like, I don't feel, I'm not feeling good. I don't think I've got much time left because, I'm hallucinating with fever, like all the things, and they won't bring me a doctor or medicine. And so, a week, 10 days rolls by. And then that night, I pull them out like I've done all the other nights before. I go lay down and roll myself up in my blanket, and I, fall asleep. Probably around 6 o'clock, because the sun goes down around 6 o'clock, and sleep was very precious and protected because it was the only escape I had. And I woke up a couple hours later because I was sick, and I stand up and say the word toilet, and no one wakes up. No one. There were 9 guys on the ground that night, and it was very strange that no one was awake. And I say the word toilet again because I don't want to leave my mat without um their permission, because I'd only done that once before and I wasn't going to do it again.
Yeah.
And so no one wakes up. Everybody's completely passed out. So I'm like flashing a small little pen light so that they can see that I'm still in the camp. I go to the bush, do what I need to do, come back, roll myself back up in my blanket. And then I can hear this sound like grass breaking, as if an animal or something is coming toward us. And then the pirate on my left jumps up, and I can't see him because it's really, really dark. Like the stars have clouded over and everything. And but I can feel that he's terrified, right? And I can hear him start whisper screaming to the rest of them to get up, and then the night just erupts into automatic gunfire. And I'm thinking, I don't think I'm going to make it out of this thing alive.
Yeah.
Like because in my mind I'm thinking, oh, I bet we're being kidnapped by another group,
Oh
because that
gosh.
was always a threat.
Yeah.
It did not once cross my mind that it could actually be good, that it could be help.
Mm.
Until somebody starts like shaking my legs and my arms and pulls the blanket down away from my face, and I'm like trying to fight back, like trying to protect myself, and I hear the voice of a young American man, and he says, Jessica, it's okay, we're the American military, we're here, you're safe now, we're gonna take you home.
Oh.
And all I can say, he helps me sit up, and I'm just like, you're American? Wait a second, you're American? Like, I cannot, I have no
Yeah.
frame, like, I have no idea what to do with all of this right now. Like, what is happening?
Oh my
And he
gosh.
says, yeah, we've been watching you for a really long time, and we know how sick you've been. And he gives me
Oh.
medicine and clean water. And there's a whole group of them. One of them picks me up and throws me over his shoulder and like
Wow.
takes me over to a place that's safe. And Paul, my first question is Paul there? Did he make it out okay? Is he alive? And they say, Paul's there, and he leans over to me. He says, Jessica, do you know who these guys are? And I'm like, I have no idea. And I'm not really sure I care. Like, I mean, I
Yeah.
think we're gonna make it home. And he's like, this is SEAL Team 6. Like, these are the guys that got Osama bin Laden.
Wow.
Like in so much shock, just shaking, and I can't even compute. And then um that would, be the start of a new life, that I
Oh.
would have to rebuild.
Yes, absolutely. I'm sure there's so much healing you have to go through and reprogramming of all the things they programmed into your brain and made you believe, because that's a lot of psychological terror to like
Mm-hmm.
take your friend away and shoot into the sky and tell you he's dead. I mean, and then go through that multiple times and for 93 days. I just can't even imagine. It's like your whole entire story is from a movie. You can't even put, I can't even imagine. You truly are a fearless female. Your journey has been incredible. One you probably never wanted ever and didn't sign up for.
Nope.
Absolutely not. But
But
I
here we
mean,
are.
but you're just an example of how
Mhm.
resilient we are as human beings and as a woman, because it's different for a woman to be surrounded by 9 men than it is for a man. Um,
Hmm.
and so I applaud you for your courageousness and your just, I can't, there's no words. You are beyond
Hmm.
brave, beyond fearless, beyond resilient. And I'm thankful and honored to be sharing your story here on the podcast. Tell us a little bit about your journey home, like when you met your husband and how that felt, and like sleeping on a bed because you haven't slept in a bed for 90 days, and how
Mm-mm.
hard it was
Taking a
to like,
shower.
yeah, get readjusted to all the things.
Yeah, it was not easy. It was not easy. I, interestingly enough, I wound up getting pregnant with my first child, my son, about a month after the rescue. And so that really threw me for a loop. Um,
Yeah.
I was like, kind of felt like I had been taken hostage again in my own body. And that was a very strange experience. And, I have PTSD, and now I have this baby, and I have postpartum depression and anxiety. And it was really, really hard. Um, we went back to Africa for about a year after the kidnapping. I didn't go back to Somalia, but Nairobi had been home really for us. We had a place
Uh-huh.
there, and my son was born in Nairobi. And after a while, it just became really difficult
Mm-hmm.
to be there. So we relocated to the US. My husband is from Sweden, so it was his first time like living in the States. I think he'd only been here like twice before, so that was a lot. And then we got this baby, and I lost my career, because I can't like do the job that I tried to go back to work for a little while, and it just, it didn't go well. So,
Mm.
and then it's like, okay, well, we kind of settled, you know, temporarily outside of Washington, D.C., because we had some friends here, and it was like, okay, well, what now? Like,
Yeah.
what am I supposed to do now? And so it's been a really long journey. I call it my desert to mountaintops, which is the name of my book that just came out about a month ago. But I have done, I will always do the work. I made a commitment to myself and to God, I think, um, when I was sitting out there, that I would do whatever psychological and emotional and spiritual repair work that needed to be done when
Yeah.
I got out. And so that has been really my main focus for the last decade, in healing, really, really
Yeah.
taking my time to heal, and recognizing that our healing journeys are never over. But I've gotten to this mountaintop, I think, and gotten to the top of that and victoriously, but then seeing that there are many more mountains I'm going to climb. But I've gotten out of that desert anyway. Um,
Yeah.
and it's been really hard,
I'm
but it's been
sure.
really, really worth it. I think I call this space surviving survival.
Mm.
And no one really talks about that. Like,
Yeah.
everybody wants to hear about the kidnapping and what that was like. And it's like, that was the easy part. Let's talk about trying to fit in with moms on the playground when you've had
Right.
nightmares about being kidnapped all night long,
I
and
know.
you're sleep deprived. Yeah.
I was thinking, like, how could you go to the grocery store and see everyone
Hmm.
just like their biggest problem is whether or not things are on sale? And you're like, I almost got murdered. Like, how do you go back to that? Like, how do you go back and assimilate to normal society while everybody is like, complaining about the smallest things when there is a whole nother world that we are not prelude to? We don't know that this is actually going on. Like, I thought the movie Captain Phillips was just like a movie. That this,
Hmm.
I didn't know that this was actually occurring and that people are actually being kidnapped, for ransom for extraordinary amounts of money. Like, once they give them the money, how can, like, I mean, I just don't understand. Like, how are we as a government allowing this to happen to people, because it's not. something that should be happening. We're the most
Mm,
intelligent country, and yet Somalia, people with less education and less technology and all of this are getting away with this,
mm.
you know?
Well, and I think that that is the conversation, right? Like, I think for the people who are like, and I've heard it all, believe me. I've been very open and I've talked publicly about this for a long, long time. But, if we are not doing our part as a, developed country or westernized country to build capacity and infrastructures and make places safer, if offering whatever capacities we have to ensure that that is possible, then things like this are going to keep happening.
Mm.
And so we have a duty, I believe, and a responsibility. Lots of people ask me if I still believe in aid work. My husband still works in international development. He manages a large program all over Africa. He goes to
Mm.
Africa once a month. Like, yeah, I still believe in it because we have been given so many resources, and we do have our educations and we do have our skill sets, and for what, right?
Yeah.
Like, there are people out there suffering, and um I want to make it clear too that the US government doesn't pay ransom demands. So,
Oh, okay.
there are people being held hostage still.
Mm.
All over the world. It's estimated that there are 300 Americans taken hostage or detained illegally by government and state actors every
Oh,
year. And it gets really tricky. It's really hard. There are no simple answers. There are no simple solutions. It wreaks havoc on the hostage or the detainee and the family
yeah.
that are sitting there waiting, um, selling off their homes and their assets to try to get together money for ransoms when that person was just, going and doing their job.
Yeah.
Um, it's really complicated. It's really hard. It's really scary. I am one of the lucky ones. I don't think that there are any women out there who have managed to survive a kidnapping and then the actual rescue attempt. Lots of hostages are killed in the
Oh,
middle of a rescue attempt. So, when I say I'm lucky, like, believe you me, I know how lucky I am.
yeah. But there is a reason why you're here, is so that you can be
Yeah.
that voice for the people of the voiceless. Because
Hmm.
without you meeting you, I would have never known that this existed, or my listeners would have never known that this is actually happening every single day. There's a lot of
Hmm.
things that the media doesn't tell us or we're not aware of. We go about our day every single day thinking, life is, we're sitting here being depressed because we didn't have this or we don't have that, when there are people truly suffering on the other side of the world. And so I commend you for telling your story, because you could have just been
Mm.
like, I'm home and that's it. I don't want to talk about it. It was very traumatizing. And I know that having to tell your story and relive it and having to say it over and over again is probably, you know, painful to relive it, but to be able to be just brave to tell your story is just incredible. And you are lucky. And we're so thankful to have you alive and being able to tell your story. And so as we wrap up this episode, what would you say is your nugget of wisdom for anyone who is listening right now that is feeling as though, life is hard and they're stuck in their own desert, maybe not like literally, but
Hmm.
what would you tell them on how to keep the faith? Because you obviously did, to keep
Mm.
going.
Well, I have a couple of things that are my fundamental truths that I go back to all the time. Um, One is that things don't last forever.
Mm.
So if you are in a desert right now, believe you me, I know how you feel. I've been in several deserts, and the good doesn't last and the bad doesn't last. It's all very temporary, and just hang on because your science has shown us that a negative emotion will pass us by in 90 seconds.
Mm.
So sometimes you can only make it, if you can only hang on for 90 seconds at a time, that's what you got to do. I get that. I've been there, and please just survive, hang on. Um, The second thing is that I really believe, and he challenged me on this the other day and said it was triggering. And I've been sitting with that a little bit, but I really don't believe that things happen to us. I believe they happen for us.
Yeah.
And the only way I have been able to carry on and to continue doing the work that I do with like raising awareness, and I work with women and supporting them and helping them tell their stories, and that's what I do all day, every day, is because I believe that like the way we make our survival bearable is to mine the meaning out of it. And that has been really healing and therapeutic for me to figure out like why it happened.
Yeah.
Because like if there was no reason for it, then oh my God, what's the point of living at all? Like,
Yeah.
so for me, I've had to that has been a huge comfort for me in my healing journey. And then I think the other thing is that while things don't last forever, they sure do take the time that they need to take. And we just have to trust the timing. I
Yeah.
again trust the universe in the timing, and sure would have liked to have spent less time out there, but I think
Yeah.
I needed, I didn't spend
Yeah.
too much because I made it out,
Yeah.
and for that I'm grateful.
I know. I think about when he said, "We've been watching you," and it's like, well, why have you been watching me for this long? Like, you should have picked me up on the first look, right?
Yeah, well, I understand now it's not that simple, but yes, I mean there is a
Yes.
temptation to think that, but I again, my life is much more easily lived when I surrender my agenda and my control. So
Ooh, I love that. Okay, so how can my audience find you? I know that you host a popular podcast. What is the name of your podcast?
I do. I host. Her name is Jessica too. So we're the two Jesses. It's called We Should Talk About That. And we
Mm.
have, conversations about really uncomfortable things sometimes just because we feel like talking about it helps other people feel less isolated and alone.
Yeah.
And I hang out on Instagram. I mean, I'm on the other socials, but Instagram is where you're going to connect with me. So, if you're a woman who has been through something and now you know something and now you want to teach us something and you'd like to do that, my publishing imprint, Soul Speak Press, is always looking for really interesting stories represented by women.
Ooh.
And I'd love to connect with you. Or then
And
just pop by and say hi.
yeah, and you have a book that you just wrote, right? What's the name
I
of your
did.
book?
It's an anthology, so it's Deserts to Mountaintops, our collective journey to reclaiming our voice, and it's 25 women's stories. One chapter is written by three women, a group, but they're all very different accounts of how we as women have journeyed out of our own desert to mountaintop and how we've reclaimed our voice.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you again for being on the podcast, Jessica.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you again for listening to Journey of a Fearless Female. I'm your host, Paola Rosser. If you're looking for a life coach or a spiritual mentor, you can book a free discovery call with me at www.fearlessfemale.com. You can also follow me on Instagram at fearlessfemale_coach, subscribe to my YouTube channel at fearlessfemale, or find me on TikTok. I'm under at paola.rosser. And if you love this episode, make sure you hit subscribe, share it with your friends, and leave a review. I read every single review, and I truly appreciate the time you spend writing it.